Murdered more than a half century ago solely because of the color of their skin, they're almost lost to history. But now, in an exhibit here in Boston, you can read their names, see their faces, and hear the stories that were unearthed as part of a 15-year investigation by the Department of Justice through the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crime Act, which was championed by the late civil rights icon, Congressman John Lewis.
Mr. Speaker, the time has come. There are hundreds, maybe even thousands of these crimes that were never brought to justice. There are murders who have walked free for decades while the families of victims cried for justice.
Last year, FRONTLINE and the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project at Northeastern University launched a multi-platform investigative report featuring these stories. It's called Unresolved, and it went on to win an Emmy for interactive media innovation. Now through the end of next week, Unresolved is on display outside Northeastern University. Joined by the project's executive producers, FRONTLINE executive producer and editor-in-chief, Raney Aronson-Rath, and Dawn Porter, a prolific and award-winning documentary filmmaker whose past works include the brilliant John Lewis' Good Trouble, Rise Again, Tulsa in the Red Summer. She was here last with Pete Souza, Obama's official photographer, to discuss her film about him, The Way I See It. Dawn, Raney, congratulations on this, and good to see you both.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
I'm happy
so great
to
to be here.
Thank you. Dawn, starting with you, this is not just a factual retelling of a horrible crime that was unresolved, but an effort to ensure that individuals are also unforgotten. Can you describe what people see at the installation?
Yeah, I think when Raney came to me with the project, and this is something that was internally developed originally at FRONTLINE, the idea was that, sometimes we can get immune to stories of tragedy. And it was, she came with a really simple premise, which is these are people. These are people with families and stories, and they have been identified as being victims of a horrific crime, and we should talk about their lives and not just their deaths. And that really spoke to me. I think when you do, work that I do that focuses on civil rights, but what I really try and do is focus on humanity. And this project really centers the humanity of the victims of these crimes.
Does it ever? Raney, my initial thought was that when you talk to survivors in these situations, they'd be dying to talk about somebody they love. But the flip side is not everybody is Mamie Till, who is willing to relive a nightmare. So what was it like reaching out to survivors to participate in this project?
I mean, I think one of the first things that Dawn and I talked about is how to do that carefully and with the consciousness that these are crimes that happened, in some cases, decades ago, and how would we approach the families with care and decency and respect? And what we decided to do is approach StoryCorps. StoryCorps has this incredible tradition of capturing people's stories that are more of an oral history model than a journalism model, even though it is journalism. And the way that we worked with them was really wonderful. They really helped us understand how do you treat people with respect as you're gathering stories. And we worked really closely with StoryCorps to gather most of the stories that you hear in the installation, and then the interactive was in collaboration with StoryCorps. And our producers on our end, they have done their homework. They know exactly what they're hoping to do. And we're also saying to the victims' families, we understand this is generational trauma. Yeah. We understand that the government should reopen these cases. And so this is a way also to reopen that conversation.
Dawn, could you briefly describe quilts are a thread that runs through a lot of this. Can you explain why?
Yeah, quilting has a lot of historical significance in the African-American community and really just in American folklore and history. And so Tamara, who is our creative artist, essentially used the motif of the quilt. Quilt making is part of a way to tell a story. It's a way to connect you with history and family. And really importantly, it's a way to connect you with place. And so by using the quilt motif, which you see in the beautiful, exquisitely, woven panels. They're digitally woven. You kind of emphasize that there are layers to this story, and that's really something that the designers, the programmers, the creators, you can see the beautiful artistic, and you know, there's a reverence to the panels when you approach them. That I think is fitting to the subject matter. And you know, I did want to also say one thing about approaching the families,
Sure.
which is this is nothing that you could ever forget. And part of the tragedy of the Till list, which is a list that was created with all good intentions, is that these families, their hopes were revived, that these murders would be investigated. And so part of, you know, that there's this broken promise. And part of what I think is so brilliant about what Raney and the entire team have done is say, we can't necessarily give you full justice, but we can at least give dignity to each person on that unsolved murders list, all of those, you know, 150 plus people.
Raney, can you spend a minute and give dignity to one of the people you did, Alberta Jones, and tell us a little bit about her story, if you would?
And that's how she got me, with Alberta. So that's a good one to start with.
Perfect choice then. Tell us.
That's a good one. So I learned about Alberta O. Jones from my team at Frontline. Carla Boras and Michelle Meisner shared the story with me. And the moment I heard about Alberta, I just couldn't stop thinking about her. She is an incredible woman. First and foremost, she was the first Louisville woman attorney. And I'm saying, like, that is a big deal in and of itself. And she's the first woman who is Black who passed the Kentucky bar. I mean, she is an incredible lawyer. And she was one of these really motivated people to help people vote. She really spent a lot of time with the Black community, helping them understand voter restrictions. I mean, this is way ahead of the conversation today. She was there on the front lines. And when she was in her mid-30s, one night she was supposed to meet a friend and she didn't. She was found the next day, and it's been an unsolved murder ever since. And she is on this list. And because her story felt so important to me, I called Dawn and asked her if she would executive produce this with me, because I've known Dawn for a long time. And I knew she would be the right person to partner with me on this. And she is the story that I shared. I just said, if you could hear this one story, why do we not know Alberta Jones's name in America? Why do we not know her name? You know, and that's part of this is saying her life matters, right? She was a leader. She was an amazing, charismatic, wonderful person. And we have so much detail about her life in this exhibit in this journalism.
Dawn, why do you was that the right choice for you, do you think?
I mean, it was so easy to relate to this young woman lawyer trying to help other women in particular, as well as to work on voting rights. She was helping, you know, people who allege domestic violence victims. Yeah. And, you know, the idea that at 34, at the, you know, kind of with her entire life ahead of her, this young Black lawyer in the 1950s was disappeared, that she could be disappeared. And that just felt intolerable. And I think, Raney, we have known each other for a long time. And so she knew that that would get me and that I could not sit by while she was disappeared. Yeah. And I'm so glad that I, you know, went on the journey, this creative journey with this remarkable team.
You know, we talked a minute ago about talking to the survivors' relatives of people who were executed in these unimaginable fashions. Here's a little bit from the exhibit from Alberta Jones's sister.
The years you get so that you adjust, but you never forget. And like I tell them, the pain never goes away. Alberta went out of the house a healthy woman and got abducted and beat to death and then thrown away like she was a bag of trash. And nobody has ever been tried for it.
You know, Dawn, you mentioned justice and hopes elevated, which often have been dashed. Has the law, the work you guys have done, have any of these crimes been solved as a result?
Well, the list remains. The crimes have not been solved. There are a number of cases where there is still possibility of that. And part of our work as filmmakers, as journalists, what we can do is publicize that these stories remain and that our system of justice demands that there be some accountability. I was working on the film about John Lewis at the time that I started working with Raney and her team on this project. And Mr. Lewis's words were literally echoed in my head, which is, if you see something that's unfair, unjust, and not right, you do something, you say something. And I think what journalists can do is, maybe we can't solve the crimes or prosecute the perpetrators, but we can say something. And that's what this exhibit will do.
Yeah, and you do it beautifully and powerfully with all your colleagues. Before you go, Raney, I mentioned this is a multi-platform kind of thing. In addition to this wonderful installation outside Northeastern, I think at 400 Huntington Avenue, if I remember correctly. There's a documentary, there's a high school curriculum. The high school curriculum thing really excited me, but then what got me nervous is, I'm assuming there's some states, we just talked about Ron DeSantis a minute ago, where such curricula are not acceptable or allowed. Is that a safe assumption?
I think that's true. Although I would say PBS Learning Media has a great way of getting this curriculum into the schools. And this is one of the most popular curriculums that they've had, because so many people are hungry for this history. And whether it's being taught is the question. And we can't say exactly what's happening there, but the great news is we're in over 60% of the schools. PBS Learning Media is amazing in that regard.
Well, you both and your colleagues have done brilliant and important work, and I really thank you for the time you've given me tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Don. Bye.